The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the sterile waiting room of the Veterans Affairs office in downtown Phoenix. It was one of those Tuesday mornings where the desert heat was already creeping through the windows, promising another scorching day. Sarah Mitchell sat quietly in her wheelchair, her worn, military-issued backpack resting on her lap, fingers drumming nervously against the armrest. At 28, she carried herself with the disciplined posture that never quite leaves a soldier, even when seated. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore a faded green t-shirt that hung loosely on her small frame. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah had been waiting for nearly 2 hours. The appointment she'd scheduled 3 weeks ago was supposed to begin at 9 a.m. sharp, but here she was, watching the clock tick past 11. This wasn't unusual for the VA system. She'd learned to expect delays, bureaucratic hurdles, and the general indifference that seemed to permeate these government buildings. But today felt different. Today, she could sense the whispers and sidewise glances from the other people in the waiting room. "Look at her," she heard a woman mutter to her companion, not bothering to lower her voice much. "Probably never even saw combat. Half these people are just looking for a handout." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she kept her eyes fixed on the outdated magazine in her hands. She'd heard it all before. The assumptions, the judgments, the casual cruelty of people who thought they knew her story just by looking at her. What they saw was a young woman in a wheelchair, and their minds immediately jumped to conclusions about what that meant and how she'd ended up there. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with artificially blonde hair and a permanent scowl, seemed to take particular pleasure in making Sarah wait. Every time Sarah approached the desk to inquire about her appointment, the woman would barely look up from her computer screen. "You'll have to wait your turn like everyone else," she'd say with barely concealed irritation. "The doctor is very busy today." But Sarah noticed how that same receptionist was all smiles and efficiency when helping the older male veterans. She'd seen this behavior before, the assumption that because she was young and female, her service couldn't have been as legitimate or as difficult as theirs. It was a prejudice that cut deep, especially coming from people who worked at an institution supposedly dedicated to serving all veterans equally. A group of middle-aged men sat in the corner, their conversation growing louder as the morning wore on. They were clearly veterans themselves, wearing their service proudly on their sleeves, literally in the case of their military-themed clothing and ball caps. Sarah recognized the type. She'd served alongside many good men just like them. But these particular individuals seemed to have appointed themselves as gatekeepers of veteran authenticity. "I bet she hurt herself in basic training," one of them chuckled, nodding in Sarah's direction. "These young girls today, they can't handle the real military. Probably twisted her ankle and claimed disability." His friends laughed along, and Sarah felt her face flush with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. She wanted to wheel over there and tell them exactly where they could stick their assumptions. She wanted to show them the scars that decorated her body like a roadmap of her service. She wanted to explain the nightmares that still woke her up screaming, the phantom pain that shot through limbs that no longer responded to her commands, the months of physical therapy and psychological counseling that had barely scratched the surface of her trauma. Instead, she took a deep breath and tried to focus on why she was here. The VA had finally approved her for a new wheelchair, one that would give her more independence and mobility. It was a small victory in a long war against bureaucratic indifference, and she wasn't going to let these people's ignorance ruin it for her. A young man, probably in his early 20s, had been watching the scene unfold with obvious discomfort. He approached Sarah's wheelchair hesitantly, clearing his throat. "Excuse me, miss," he said softly. "I just wanted to say thank you for your service. I don't know what you went through, but I appreciate what you did for a country." Sarah looked up at him, surprised by the genuine kindness in his voice. "Thank you," she replied quietly. "That means a lot." The young man glanced over at the group of men who were still making their crude comments. "Don't listen to them," he said. "Some people just don't understand." As he walked away, Sarah felt a small spark of hope. Not everyone was quick to judge. Not everyone assumed the worst. But that spark was quickly extinguished as she overheard the receptionist talking to her colleague. "I don't know why we waste so much money on these fake disabilities. Half of them are just looking for a free ride, especially the young ones."
Sarah's hands clenched into fists. She'd reached her breaking point.
The morning had started like any other for Sarah, but sitting in that VA waiting room, surrounded by whispers and judgment, she felt the familiar weight of her past pressing down on her shoulders. The comments about her age, her legitimacy as a veteran, her right to be there, they weren't new, but they never got easier to hear. She closed her eyes for a moment and let her mind drift back to a different time, a different place. Afghanistan, 2018. The memory came flooding back with the intensity it always did, vivid and unforgiving. She was 24 then, Sergeant Sarah Mitchell, 1st Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment, one of only a handful of women who had made it through the grueling selection process and earns the right to serve in direct combat operations. The Rangers weren't just any military unit. They were elite, the best of the best. Sarah had fought tooth and nail for her place among them, enduring physical and mental challenges that would have broken most people. She'd proven herself again and again, earning the respect of her fellow soldiers through blood, sweat, and unwavering determination. But the people in this waiting room saw none of that. They saw a young woman in a wheelchair and made their assumptions accordingly. "Mitchell!" The receptionist's sharp voice cut through her memories. "Room 247, finally." Sarah wheeled herself down the hallway, past the motivational posters about veteran benefits and the photographs of smiling servicemen and women. The irony wasn't lost on her. These images portrayed the VA as a place of respect and support, but her experience had been quite different. Dr. Rodriguez was waiting for her in the examination room, a kind-faced man in his 50s who actually seemed to give a damn about his patients. He was one of the good ones Sarah had learned over the past year of appointments and evaluations. "Sorry about the wait, Sarah," he said genuinely. "I know how frustrating this process can be." "It's okay, Doc," Sarah replied, though they both knew it wasn't really okay. None of this was okay. Dr. Rodriguez pulled up her file on his computer, reviewing the extensive documentation of her injuries and treatment history. "How are you feeling today? Any changes in pain levels or mobility?" Sarah shifted in her wheelchair, considering the question. How was she feeling? Angry, frustrated, tired of being judged by people who had no idea what she had been through. But she knew that wasn't what he was asking. "About the same," she said. "Some days are better than others." The doctor nodded, making notes. He'd been treating Sarah for over a year now, and he understood the complexity of her situation. Her injuries weren't visible in the way that many people expected war wounds to be. There were no missing limbs, no obvious disfigurement, just a young woman whose spine had been damaged beyond repair in service to her country. "The new wheelchair should make a significant difference," Dr. Rodriguez continued. "Better maneuverability, more comfortable seating, improved independence. It's a good upgrade." As they went through the routine examination and paperwork, Sarah found herself thinking about the comments from the waiting room, the assumption that she was somehow less deserving because of her age and gender, the casual dismissal of her service and sacrifice. "Doc, do you ever get frustrated with how people treat veterans? I mean, the assumptions they make?" Dr. Rodriguez paused in his note-taking and looked at her with understanding eyes. "Every day," he said quietly. "I see it all the time. People think they know what a veteran looks like, what their story should be. They have these preconceived notions about who deserves help and who doesn't." It's just, Sarah struggled to find the words. "I gave everything for this country. We all did. And to have people question whether I belong here, whether my service was real." "Your service was real, Sarah," Dr. Rodriguez said firmly. "What happened to you was real, and you have every right to be here to receive the care and support you've earned." They finished up the appointment with Dr. Rodriguez assuring her that the new wheelchair would be ready for pickup in about a week. As Sarah made her way back through the waiting room, she noticed that the crowd had changed somewhat. Some people had left, others had arrived, But the atmosphere remained the same. A mixture of genuine veterans seeking help and the bureaucratic indifference that seemed to define the system. The receptionist barely looked up as Sarah approached the desk to schedule her follow-up appointment. "Next available is 3 weeks out," she said in a bored tone. "That's fine," Sarah replied, though it really wasn't. 3 weeks might as well be 3 months in terms of how long it would feel. As she prepared to leave, Sarah overheard the same group of men from earlier, now joined by a few others. Their conversation had moved on from criticizing her specifically to more general complaints about the VA system and who they felt deserved benefits. "Too many people taking advantage," one of them was saying. "Back in my day, you had to really prove you were hurt." Another nodded in agreement. "These young kids today, they don't know what real service looks like." Sarah felt that familiar fire building in her chest, the urge to confront them, to defend herself and countless other veterans who face this kind of prejudice daily. But she'd learned to pick her battles, and this didn't feel like the right time or place. The Phoenix sun was merciless as Sarah wheeled herself across the parking lot toward her specially modified Honda Civic. The heat radiating from the asphalt made the air shimmer, and she could feel sweat beading on her forehead despite the early hour. Her hand controls and wheelchair lift had cost more than she wanted to spend, but they represented something invaluable: independence. As she approached her vehicle, Sarah noticed a familiar figure leaning against a pickup truck nearby. It was Marcus Thompson, a fellow veteran she'd met at a support group meeting several months ago. Marcus was in his 40s, an Army infantry veteran who'd lost his left leg to an IED in Iraq. Unlike the men in the waiting room, Marcus understood the reality of military service in the 21st century. "Hey, Sarah," Marcus called out, walking over with the easy gait of someone who'd long since mastered his prosthetic. "Rough morning in there?" Sarah paused in transferring from her wheelchair to the driver's seat. "You could say that," she replied with a weary smile. "Same old attitudes, same old assumptions." Marcus nodded knowingly. "I heard some of those idiots talking. Don't let them get to you. They're stuck in some fantasy version of the military that never really existed." "It's just frustrating," Sarah said, folding her wheelchair with practiced efficiency. "I know I shouldn't let it bother me, but some days it does anyway," Marcus finished. "Trust me, I get it. People see the prosthetic and automatically assume they know my story. They either treat me like a hero or a victim, never just like a person." Sarah appreciated Marcus's understanding. In the years since she'd started attending the support group meetings, she'd found that connecting with other veterans who truly understood her experience was one of the few things that helped her feel less alone in her struggles. "You know what the worst part is?" Sarah continued, starting her car and adjusting the air conditioning. "I spent 4 years proving myself over and over again, first in basic training, then in Ranger School, then in Afghanistan. Every single day, I had to show that I belonged, that I could do the job, and I did it. I excelled at it." Marcus leaned against her car door, listening intently. Sarah rarely opened up about her military service, even in their support group meetings. Most of what she knew about her background had come in bits and pieces over months of conversations. "Rangers, right? That's serious business. I've worked with your unit before. You guys don't mess around." Sarah nodded, feeling a familiar mix of pride and pain. 1st Battalion, 75th Rangers. Sniper team. 3 deployments. She paused, her hands gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. "I was good at my job, Marcus. Really good. My spotter and we saved a lot of lives." "I don't doubt it," Marcus said seriously. "So what happened, if you don't mind me asking?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the desert landscape beyond the parking lot. She'd told this story to doctors, to therapists, to disability evaluators, but somehow sharing it with a fellow veteran felt different. October 15th, 2018, she began, her voice taking on the measured tone of someone recounting a tactical briefing. We were providing overwatch for a convoy operation near Kandahar. Intelligence suggested possible Taliban activity in the area, so they wanted sniper teams positioned on the surrounding ridgelines. Marcus remained silent, understanding that sometimes veterans needed to tell their stories at their own pace. My spotter, Jake Williams, good kid from Ohio, and I had been in position for about 6 hours. It was one of those operations where nothing happens for hours and then everything happens at once. Sarah's eyes grew distant. The convoy got hit on schedule, IED followed by small arms fire from multiple positions. Standard Taliban playbook. She paused to take a sip of water from the bottle she always kept in her car. The Arizona heat was unforgiving, but it was nothing compared to the desert conditions she'd endured in Afghanistan. Jake and I started engaging targets immediately. We had clear lines of sight on 2 of the ambush positions, and we were doing what we trained for, providing precision fire support to get our guys out of that kill zone. Sarah's voice carried a note of professional pride that even the trauma couldn't entirely diminish. We were effective, really effective. In about 10 minutes, we'd eliminated 6 confirmed targets and forced the others to break contact. The convoy was able to extract with minimal casualties. Marcus could hear the "but" coming in her tone. "But then everything went wrong," Sarah said quietly. As we were preparing to move to our extraction point, a mortar round landed about 30 meters from our position. The blast threw both of us down the rocky slope we'd been positioned on. She took another sip of water, her hands trembling slightly. Even after all this time, the memory of that moment remained vivid and terrifying. Jake took shrapnel to the head and chest. He died before the medevac could reach us. I landed hard on my back against a boulder. The impact compressed 3 vertebrae and caused permanent damage to my spinal cord. "I'm sorry," Marcus said simply. "About Jake, about all of it." Sarah nodded. He was 22 years old, had a girlfriend back home he was planning to marry. They're going to have kids, buy a house, do all the normal things that normal people do.
That's the thing people don't understand, Sarah continued, her voice carrying the weight of memories that never seemed to get lighter. When they see me in this chair, they don't see Jake. They don't see the 6 Taliban fighters we eliminated that day, or the 18 soldiers in that convoy who made it home to their families because we did our job. Marcus nodded solemnly. As a combat veteran himself, he understood the complexity of those memories. The pride and successful missions tangled up with the pain of loss and injury. They just see a young woman they assume is looking for a handout, Sarah said, echoing the cruel words she'd overheard in the waiting room. They have no idea what it took to earn the right to wear that uniform, let alone excel in a role that most people, including most men, could never handle. Sarah had been one of only 12 women to complete the Ranger Assessment and Selection Program during her cycle. The physical demands were brutal enough: forced marches with heavy packs, obstacle courses, combat simulations that pushed candidates to their absolute limits. But the mental challenges were often even more demanding. Sleep deprivation, stress inoculation, leadership evaluations under extreme pressure. She remembered the night she'd almost quit, about halfway through the program. They'd been on a navigation exercise in the Florida swamps, carrying 60-pound packs through chest-deep water filled with alligators and snakes. Her team had been lost for hours, their radio was malfunctioning, and one of her fellow candidates had developed what appeared to be severe heat exhaustion. While some of the other candidates argued about which direction to go, Sarah had taken charge. She'd improvised a stretcher from branches and equipment, redistributed the 6 soldiers' gear among the team, and used her knowledge of celestial navigation to guide them back to the checkpoint. They'd arrived 3 hours late, covered in mud and insect bites, but they had all made it. That was the moment Sarah knew she belonged, not because she was as strong as the men, though she was stronger than most, but because she could think clearly under pressure and make the hard decisions that kept people alive. "You know what the instructors used to tell us?" Sarah said to Marcus, managing a small smile at the memory. They'd say, "Rangers, lead the way." Not "male Rangers lead the way," or "Rangers lead the way unless you're a woman." Just
Rangers lead the way, period. Marcus smiled back. And you did. You led the way. I tried to, Sarah replied, right up until that mortar round changed everything. The transition from elite soldier to disabled veteran had been the hardest challenge of Sarah's life. Harder than Ranger School, harder than combat deployments, harder than anything she had ever imagined facing. The physical rehabilitation had been grueling. Months of surgery, physical therapy, learning to navigate the world from a wheelchair. But the psychological adjustment had been even more difficult. For 4 years, Sarah's identity had been built around her physical capabilities and her role as a soldier. She could march 20 miles with a full pack, hit targets at distances that would challenge Olympic marksmen, and operate effectively in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. Then, in an instant, all of that was gone. The hardest part wasn't losing the use of my legs, Sarah confided to Marcus. It was losing my sense of purpose. In the Rangers, I knew exactly who I was and what I was supposed to do. I was a sniper. I was a soldier. I was someone who made a difference. You're still someone who makes a difference, Marcus pointed out, just in different ways. Sarah appreciated his optimism, but she wasn't entirely convinced. These days, her biggest accomplishments seemed to involve successfully navigating bureaucratic obstacles and advocating for herself in medical appointments. It felt like a significant step down from literally saving lives in combat. Some days, I wonder if it was worth it, she admitted quietly. The sacrifice, the injury, the way people treat me now. Sometimes I think I should have stayed home, gone to college, lived a normal life. Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering his response carefully. Then he finally said, "Can I tell you something? When I got back from Iraq, I went through the same thought process. Wondered if serving was worth losing my leg, worth the nightmares, worth all the bureaucratic bullshit we have to deal with now." Sarah nodded, encouraging him to continue. "But then I realized something," Marcus said. "The people who question our service, who make assumptions about what we deserve, they're not the ones we served for. We served for each other. We served for the 18 guys in that convoy who went home to their families because you and Jake did your job perfectly." The weight of his words settled over Sarah like a familiar blanket. It was something she'd heard before in various forms from therapists and counselors, but hearing it from another veteran made it feel more real. "I know you're right," Sarah said. "Intellectually, I know that. But emotionally, some days it's hard to hold on to that perspective." "I get it," Marcus replied. "Some days are harder than others, but you can't let ignorant people define your worth or diminish what you accomplished." As they continued talking in the parking lot, Sarah found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. The decision to join the military hadn't been made lightly. She'd grown up in a small town in Montana, the daughter of a high school teacher and a mechanic. Her family had a tradition of military service. Her grandfather had served in Vietnam, her uncle in the First Gulf War.
Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Growing up in Whitefish, Montana, Sarah Mitchell had always been different from the other girls in her class. While they were interested in cheerleading and shopping at the mall, Sarah was more likely to be found hiking in Glacier National Park or helping her father work on engines in their garage. She'd been a natural athlete, track and field, cross-country running, even some competitive shooting with her grandfather, who taught her to handle firearms safely and accurately from a young age. The decision to join the military had crystallized during her senior year of high school. She'd been watching the news coverage of operations in Afghanistan and Iraq, seeing stories of American soldiers making a difference in dangerous places around the world. Something about that sense of purpose, that opportunity to serve something larger than herself, had called to her. Her parents had been supportive but worried. They understood her desire to serve, but they also knew their daughter well enough to realize that she wouldn't be content with the traditional military role. Sarah had always pushed boundaries, always demanded to be judged by her abilities rather than others' expectations. "I remember when you first told us you wanted to try out for the Rangers," Marcus said.
bringing Sarah back to the present conversation. That must have been a tough conversation with your family. Sarah laughed, remembering her mother's reaction. My mom almost fainted. She'd already accepted that I was going into the army, but Rangers? She spent weeks researching everything she could find about the selection process and combat roles. What did she find? Enough to scare her even more, Sarah replied with a wry smile. But she also found statistics about how elite units actually have better training, better equipment, and often lower casualty rates than regular infantry. It wasn't necessarily more dangerous, it was just more selective. The conversation with her parents had been one of the most difficult of Sarah's life. Her father had served briefly in the National Guard and understood military culture better than most civilian families. He'd been proud of her ambition, but concerned about the physical and mental demands she'd face. "Are you sure this is what you want?" he had asked her during one of their long talks on the porch of their family home. "It's not going to be easy. You'll be under more scrutiny than the men, and some people will never accept that you belong there." Sarah had considered his words carefully before responding. "Dad, I've never wanted easy. I want to be the best version of myself, and I want to make a difference. If that means proving myself every single day, then that's what I'll do." Looking back now, sitting in a VA parking lot in Phoenix, Arizona, Sarah realized how naive she had been about some aspects of military life. She'd understood that she'd face skepticism and prejudice, but she'd believed that excellence would eventually overcome those obstacles. She'd thought that proving herself in training and combat would earn her universal respect and acceptance. The reality had been more complicated. Even after earning her Ranger tab, even after successful deployments and commendations for her performance, there had always been people who questioned her legitimacy. Some were fellow soldiers who couldn't accept that a woman could excel in their profession. Others were civilians who held outdated notions about gender roles and military service. The ironic thing, Sarah told Marcus, was that some of the harshest criticism came from other women. I remember this one colonel, a nurse, very accomplished in her own right, who pulled me aside after a ceremony and told me I was making things harder for all the women in the military. Marcus raised an eyebrow. How did she figure that? She said that by pushing into combat roles, I was reinforcing the idea that women had to act like men to be valuable in the military. She thought I should have focused on traditional support roles where women had already proven themselves. It had been a conversation that stuck with Sarah for years. She'd understood the colonel's perspective. There were certainly valid arguments about different approaches to advancing women's roles in the military, but Sarah had never seen herself as trying to act like a man. She had simply been trying to maximize her potential and serve her country to the best of her abilities. "What did you tell her?" Marcus asked. "I told her that I wasn't trying to make a statement about what all women should do. I was just trying to do what I was called to do. I happened to be exceptionally good at marksmanship. I was physically capable of meeting the standards, and I wanted to serve in a role where I could make the biggest difference." Sarah had gone on to explain to the colonel that diversity of roles and perspectives could only strengthen the military. Some women would excel in combat positions, others in support roles, others in leadership and planning positions. The key was ensuring that everyone had the opportunity to contribute according to their abilities and interests. She wasn't entirely wrong, though, Sarah admitted to Marcus. There was extra pressure. Every mistake I made reflected not just on me, but on every woman who might want to follow a similar path. That's a heavy burden to carry. Marcus nodded understanding. I can't imagine. Bad enough dealing with the normal stress of combat operations without also feeling like you're representing your entire gender. It was exhausting sometimes, but it was also motivating. I knew that if I succeeded, it would open doors for other women. And I knew that if I failed, it would be used as evidence that women didn't belong in combat roles.
The pressure to represent all women in combat roles had been particularly intense during Sarah's first deployment to Afghanistan in 2017. She'd been assigned to a team led by Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, a career soldier with 2 previous deployments who'd initially been skeptical about having a female sniper on his team.
Rodriguez wasn't a bad guy, Sarah explained to Marcus. He was just worried about team dynamics and whether I could handle the physical and mental demands. He'd seen other experiments with gender integration that hadn't gone well. Sarah remembered her first mission with the team, a reconnaissance operation that required them to hike 12 miles through mountainous terrain carrying full combat loads. She'd not only kept pace with the men, but had actually performed better than two of her male teammates on the physical fitness assessments. "What changed his mind?" Marcus asked. "Results," Sarah said simply. "My first confirmed kill came about 3 weeks into the deployment. We were providing overwatch for a patrol that got pinned down by sniper fire from a compound about 800 meters away. The enemy sniper was well positioned and had already wounded 2 of our guys." Sarah's voice took on the calm, professional tone she'd learned to use when discussing combat operations. It was a way of maintaining emotional distance from memories that could otherwise be overwhelming. "I identified the muzzle flash from his position and had a clean shot within about 30 seconds. 1 round, center mass. The enemy fire stopped immediately, and our patrol was able to evacuate their wounded." It had been a textbook engagement, the kind of precision shooting that the Rangers were famous for. But for Sarah, it had represented something more significant. It was proof that she belonged, that she could perform under pressure when lives were on the line. "Rodriguez came up to me after we got back to base," Sarah continued. "He said, 'Mitchell, I don't care if you're a woman, a man, or a Martian, you're a damn good soldier, and I'm proud to have you on my team.'" That had been the turning point in Sarah's relationship with her unit. Once she'd proven herself in combat, the gender issues largely faded into the background. Her teammates learned to trust her skills and judgment, and she became just another ranger doing her job. But the broader military culture had been slower to change. Even with successful combat operations under her belt, Sarah continued to face skepticism from some quarters. There were always people who attributed her success to luck or special treatment or anything other than skill and dedication. The worst part, Sarah told Marcus, was the assumption that I was somehow taking opportunities away from men, as if there were a limited number of sniper positions, and by taking one, I was preventing some more deserving male soldier from serving. Marcus shook his head. That's such flawed logic. The military needs the best people in every position, regardless of gender. Exactly, Sarah agreed. But try explaining that to people who are already convinced that women don't belong in combat roles. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of Sarah's phone buzzing with a text message. It was from Dr. Rodriguez's office confirming her wheelchair pickup appointment for the following week. The reminder brought her thoughts back to the present and the frustrating morning she'd had at the VA office. "I should probably head home," Sarah said, glancing at the clock on her dashboard. "I've got a therapy appointment this afternoon." Marcus nodded and stepped back from her car. "Hey, Sarah," as she prepared to drive away, "don't let those ignorant people get to you. You've got nothing to prove to them." Sarah appreciated his support, but as she drove home through the Phoenix streets, she found herself thinking about the comments she'd overheard. The casual dismissal of her service, the assumption that she was somehow less deserving of benefits than older male veterans. Part of her wanted to go back to that VA office and confront every person who'd made assumptions about her. She wanted to tell them about Afghanistan, about the lives she had saved, about a friend she had lost. She wanted to show them the commendation letters from commanding officers, the photos from successful missions, the evidence of her legitimate military service. But another part of her was just tired. Tired of having to prove herself over and over again. Tired of being judged by people who had no understanding of what modern military service entailed. Tired of feeling like she had to carry the burden of representing all women veterans. As she pulled into her apartment complex, Sarah made a decision. She was going to go back to that VA office next week to pick up her new wheelchair, and if anyone wanted to make assumptions about her service or her worthiness, she was going to be ready for them. She thought about the tattoo on her shoulder, the one that told her real story to those who knew how to read it. The Ranger tab, the sniper's crosshairs, the dates of her deployments,
and the words "Rangers lead the way" inscribed beneath it all. It was a piece of art that had cost her nearly $1,000 and taken 12 hours to complete, but it was worth every penny and every minute of pain. Most people never saw that tattoo. It was usually covered by her clothing, hidden beneath the fabric of shirts and jackets. But it was there, a permanent reminder of who she was and what she had accomplished, regardless of what others might think or say. Tomorrow, Sarah decided, she was going to wear a tank top to the VA office.
The week that followed Sarah's decision passed with surprising normalcy. She attended her therapy sessions, worked on her online college coursework, and tried to maintain the routines that kept her grounded. Dr. Patricia Hawkins, her therapist, had been helping Sarah process not just the trauma of her combat injury, but also the ongoing challenges of readjusting to civilian life. "You seem different today," Dr. Hawkins observed during their Thursday session. "More focused, maybe? Like you've made some kind of decision?" Sarah considered the observation carefully. Dr. Hawkins was perceptive. It came with 15 years of treating combat veterans. "I suppose I have," Sarah replied. She explained the situation at the VA office, the comments she'd overheard, and her growing frustration with people's assumptions about her service. Dr. Hawkins listened without interruption, occasionally making notes, but mostly just providing the kind of focused attention that Sarah had learned to value. "And how do you plan to handle this?" Dr. Hawkins asked when Sarah finished her account. "I'm going to show them who I really am," Sarah said simply. "Not aggressively, not confrontationally, just honestly." Dr. Hawkins nodded thoughtfully. "And what does that look like for you?" "It means not hiding anymore. I've spent so much time trying to blend in, trying not to make waves. But maybe it's time people saw the whole picture." The conversation with Dr. Hawkins had reinforced Sarah's resolve. She wasn't planning anything dramatic or confrontational. She simply wanted to stop concealing parts of herself to make others more comfortable. If people were going to make assumptions about her, at least they'd be making assumptions based on complete information. The night before her appointment, Sarah stood in front of her bedroom mirror, examining the tattoo that covered most of her right shoulder and upper arm. The artwork was intricate and meaningful. Every element told a part of her story. The Ranger tab sat prominently at the top, surrounded by airborne wings and the distinctive arrowhead patch of her unit. Below that, a detailed sniper's scope crosshair was overlaid with the coordinates of the spot in Afghanistan where Jake had died. The most striking element was the quote that curved around the bottom of the design: "Some gave all gave some." It was a common military saying, but for Sarah, it carried deeply personal meaning. Jake had given all: his life, his future, his dreams. Sarah had given some: her mobility, her sense of invincibility, her easy path through the world. Around the main elements, smaller details told the rest of her story. 3 small stars represented her deployments. A set of crosshairs with 800 plus underneath documented her confirmed kills. The dates 10, 15, 18 were inscribed in small, precise numbers, the day that changed everything. Sarah had gotten the tattoo 6 months after her medical discharge, during one of her darkest periods. She had been struggling with depression, anger, and a profound sense of lost identity. The art tattooist, a veteran himself, had understood exactly what she was trying to accomplish. "This isn't just ink," he had told her during one of their sessions. "This is your story, your truth. Don't let anyone tell you it doesn't matter." Now, as she prepared for bed, Sarah felt a sense of calm determination. Tomorrow, she would go to the VA office wearing a sleeveless shirt. She would collect her new wheelchair, handle whatever bureaucratic requirements were necessary, and be herself, completely and unapologetically. The morning of her appointment dawned clear and hot, even by Phoenix standards. Sarah dressed carefully, choosing a simple black tank top that would clearly display her tattoo, paired with comfortable jeans and her most worn pair of combat boots. She had kept the boots from her military service. They were scuffed and faded, but they still fit perfectly and served as a small connection to her past. As she drove to the VA office, Sarah found herself thinking about the conversation she had had with Marcus and Dr. Hawkins. Both had been supportive of her decision, but both had also counseled patience and perspective. Not everyone would understand her story, even when presented with clear evidence of her service.
The goal isn't to change everyone's mind, Dr. Hawkins had reminded her. The goal is to be authentic to yourself and your experience. Sarah parked in the same section of the lot where she had talked with Marcus the week before. The desert sun was already intense, and she could feel its heat on her exposed shoulders as she transferred from her car to her wheelchair. The sensation was oddly liberating. She had spent so long keeping her tattoo covered that the simple act of letting it show felt like a small victory. The waiting room looked much the same as it had the previous week, though the faces had changed somewhat. The same receptionist sat behind the desk, looking just as bored and irritated as before. A new group of veterans occupied the seating area, their conversations creating a familiar buzz of military slang and shared experiences. Sarah wheeled herself to the reception desk, her tattoo clearly visible to anyone who cared to look. The receptionist glanced up from her computer screen with the same expression of mild annoyance she had displayed the week before. "Name?" the woman asked without making eye contact. "Sarah Mitchell," Sarah replied clearly. "I'm here to pick up my new wheelchair." This time the receptionist did look up, and her eyes immediately went to Sarah's shoulder. Sarah watched as her expression shifted from boredom to confusion to something that might have been respect.
The receptionist stared at Sarah's tattoo for several long seconds, her eyes tracing the intricate details of the Ranger tab, the airborne wings, and the sniper's crosshairs. When she finally looked back up at Sarah's face, her demeanor had completely changed. I'm sorry," the woman stammered, clearly flustered. "I didn't realize, she trailed off, apparently unable to find the right words. Sarah maintained her composure, neither hostile nor particularly friendly. "I'm here for my wheelchair pickup appointment," she repeated calmly. "Of course, absolutely," the receptionist said, suddenly animated with helpful efficiency. "Let me just pull up your file here. Mitchell, Sarah, Sergeant, 75th Rangers." She paused, reading from her screen. "It says here you were a sniper team leader? 3 deployments?" "That's correct," Sarah confirmed. The receptionist was quiet for a moment, still processing what she was seeing. I apologize for last week. I didn't know about your service record." Sarah appreciated the apology, though she found it telling that the woman's attitude had only changed after seeing visible proof of her military service. "Thank you," she said simply. As Sarah waited for her paperwork to be processed, she became aware that other people in the waiting room had noticed her tattoo as well. The conversations around her had quieted somewhat, and she could sense people stealing glances in her direction. Unlike the previous week's experience, however, the attention didn't feel hostile or dismissive. An older man, probably in his 60s, approached her wheelchair hesitantly. He was wearing a Vietnam veteran cap and walked with the careful gait of someone dealing with old injuries. "Excuse me, miss," he said respectfully. "I couldn't help but notice your ink. 75th Rangers?" "Yes, sir," Sarah replied. The man's weathered face broke into a genuine smile. "My son served with the 2nd Battalion. Different time frame than you, I think, but same brotherhood." He paused, looking more closely at her tattoo. "Sniper?" 3 deployments, Sarah confirmed. "Well, I'll be damned," the man said, shaking his head in amazement. "Begging your pardon, but when I saw you here last week, I made some assumptions. I owe you an apology, young lady, and my thanks." Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the Arizona heat. "Thank you, sir. That means a lot." "Charlie Peterson," the man said, extending his hand. "1st Cavalry Division, Vietnam, 68 to 70. "Sarah Mitchell," she replied, shaking his hand firmly. "Honor to meet you, Mr. Peterson." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Rodriguez, who had come out to personally oversee the wheelchair handover. He took one look at Sarah's visible tattoo and smiled broadly. "There's the warrior I've been treating," he said warmly. "I was wondering when you'd stop hiding that masterpiece." Sarah felt herself blushing slightly. Seemed like the right time to let people see the whole picture. "Indeed it does," Dr. Rodriguez agreed. "Come on. Let's get you set up with your new ride." As they made their way to the equipment room, Sarah noticed that the entire atmosphere of the VA office seemed different. Staff members who had barely acknowledged her presence the previous week were now nodding respectfully as she passed. Other veterans in the hallways were making eye contact and offering the subtle nods of recognition that passed between military personnel. The new wheelchair was a significant upgrade from her previous model, lighter, more maneuverable, with better cushioning and ergonomic design. As Dr. Rodriguez went through the adjustment process and explained the various features, Sarah found herself genuinely excited about the increased independence it would provide. "This should make a real difference in your daily mobility," Dr. Rodriguez said as they fine-tuned the seat height and armrest positions. Better weight distribution, improved push rim design, and the quick-release wheels will make transfers much easier. As they worked through the setup process, Sarah became aware of a small crowd gathering near the equipment room. Word had apparently spread about the female ranger, and several staff members and veterans had found reasons to pass by and catch a glimpse of her tattoo. Among the small group was a young woman in military fatigues. Active duty by the look of her uniform, she appeared to be in her early 20s with the earnest expression of someone still relatively new to military service. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to bother you, but I heard you were a ranger? Is that true?" Sarah looked at the young woman, a specialist according to her rank insignia, and saw something of her younger self in the soldier's eager expression. "It's true," Sarah confirmed. "1st Battalion, Sniper Team." The specialist's eyes went wide. That's incredible. I'm trying to get into special operations myself. MP currently, but I want to try for Rangers or maybe Special Forces." Sarah studied the young woman more carefully. She had the lean build and alert posture of someone who took physical fitness seriously, and her uniform was immaculate in the way that suggested pride in her appearance and attention to detail. "What's your name, specialist?" Sarah asked. "Rodriguez, ma'am. Maria Rodriguez. No relation to the doc here," she added with a quick smile toward Dr. Rodriguez. "Well, Specialist Rodriguez, what specifically do you want to know?" Maria glanced around at the small crowd that had gathered, suddenly seeming self-conscious about the attention. "Maybe we could talk sometime. I mean, if you have time. I've never met a female ranger before. I have so many questions about the selection process, about serving in combat, about—" She trailed off, overwhelmed by everything she wanted to ask.
Sarah saw herself in Maria Rodriguez's eager expression and nervous energy. The young specialist reminded her of her own determination years ago when she'd been researching special operations units and trying to figure out how to turn her ambitions into reality. "Tell you what," Sarah said, pulling a business card from her wallet. It was simple, just her name, phone number, and email address. She'd had them made for networking purposes related to her college studies, but this seemed like a more important use. "Give me a call this weekend. We can grab coffee and talk about whatever you want to know." Maria's face lit up as she accepted the card. "Really? That would be amazing. Thank you so much, ma'am." "Just Sarah is fine," Sarah replied with a smile. "And, Specialist Rodriguez, don't let anyone tell you that you can't do it. If you want it badly enough and you're willing to work for it, the only thing standing in your way is yourself." As Maria rejoined her group and the crowd began to disperse, Sarah found herself reflecting on the dramatic change in atmosphere from the previous week. The same building, many of the same people, but completely different reactions to her presence. The visible evidence of her service had transformed her from an object of suspicion into someone worthy of respect and curiosity. Charlie Peterson, the Vietnam veteran she'd met earlier, approached her again as she was preparing to leave. "Sarah," he said quietly, "I want you to know that what happened last week, the way some of us acted, that's not who we really are. We're old and set in our ways sometimes. The military we knew was different." Sarah appreciated his honesty. "Mr. Peterson, I understand. Change is hard, and the military has evolved a lot in the past few decades." "It has indeed," he agreed, "and mostly for the better from what I can see. My son tells me stories about the women he served with, pilots, medics, intelligence specialists, brave as hell, every one of them." Charlie paused, looking thoughtful. You know, I've got a granddaughter about your age. She's thinking about joining the Navy. Maybe you could talk to her sometime. Show her that anything's possible? Sarah felt a familiar warmth at the request. I'd be happy to. As she made her way back through the waiting room in her new wheelchair, Sarah noticed that the entire dynamic had shifted. Veterans who had been pointedly ignoring her the previous week were now nodding respectfully. The staff members were more attentive and professional. Even the receptionist, who had been openly dismissive before, now treated her with the courtesy that should have been standard from the beginning. It was a sobering reminder of how much people's perceptions could be influenced by incomplete information. Last week, these same people had seen a young woman in a wheelchair and made assumptions based on their preconceived notions about who deserved veteran benefits. This week, they saw the same woman, but with additional context that changed their entire understanding of her story. Sarah found herself thinking about all the other veterans who might be facing similar prejudice. Young veterans, female veterans, veterans with invisible disabilities, or non-traditional service records. How many of them were being judged unfairly by people who thought they knew what a real veteran looked like? As she reached the parking lot, Sarah was surprised to see Marcus Thompson waiting by her car. He was leaning against his truck, arms crossed, with a broad grin on his face. I heard through the grapevine that you caused quite the stir in there today, he said as she approached. Sarah laughed, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. Word travels fast in the veteran community. Faster than you might think, Marcus confirmed. Dr. Rodriguez texted me about 20 minutes ago, said you'd finally decided to let people see the real Sarah Mitchell. I felt like it was the right time, Sarah said, transferring from her wheelchair to her car. I got tired of hiding who I am to make other people more comfortable. Marcus nodded approvingly. Good for you. How did it feel? Sarah considered the question as she folded her wheelchair and loaded it into her car. Liberating, she said finally. Scary at first, but then liberating. I forgot what it was like to just be myself without worrying about other people's assumptions. And the reactions? Mixed, but mostly positive. A lot of apologies from people who had made judgments last week, some genuine curiosity and respect. A young specialist who wants to try for Rangers herself. Marcus's expression grew serious. That's the real impact, you know. Not changing the minds of the people who are rude to you, though that's nice too, but inspiring the next generation, showing young women like that specialist that they have options. Sarah felt the truth of his words settling over her. She'd been so focused on her own frustration and anger that she hadn't fully considered the broader implications of her visibility. By hiding her service record and her accomplishments, she'd been inadvertently contributing to the invisibility of women in combat roles. You know what the funny thing is, Sarah said as she started her car? I spent so much energy trying to blend in, trying not to make waves. But maybe making waves is exactly what's needed. Maybe it is, Marcus agreed. The military is changing, society is changing, but change doesn't happen automatically. It happens because people like you have the courage to be visible, to challenge assumptions, to show the world what's possible. As Sarah drove home, she found herself thinking about the phone call she'd be receiving from Maria Rodriguez over the weekend. What advice would she give to the young specialist? What lessons had she learned that might help another woman navigate the challenges of pursuing special operations training? More importantly, what responsibility did she have to be visible, to be a role model, to use her experience to open doors for others?
The weekend conversation with Maria Rodriguez turned out to be one of the most meaningful interactions Sarah had experienced since her discharge from the military. They met at a small coffee shop near the base where Maria was stationed, and what was supposed to be a brief chat extended into a 3-hour conversation, covering everything from physical preparation for special operations selection to the psychological challenges of being a woman in male-dominated units. The thing that scares me most, Maria confided over her second cup of coffee, isn't the physical stuff. I know I can handle that. It's the doubt. Not just from other people, but from myself. What if I get there and realize
I don't actually belong. Sarah recognized the fear immediately. It was the same uncertainty that had plagued her throughout her military career. The nagging voice that suggested maybe the critics were right. Maybe she was in over her head. "Can I tell you something?" Sarah said, leaning forward across the small table. "That doubt never completely goes away. Even after I'd proven myself in training, even after successful combat deployments, there were still moments when I wondered if I belonged." Maria looked surprised. "Really? But you made it through everything. You succeeded." "I did," I agreed. "But success doesn't eliminate self-doubt. It just gives you evidence to argue with it. The key is learning not to let the doubt paralyze you." They spent considerable time discussing the practical aspects of special operations selection, the physical fitness requirements, the mental challenges, the importance of teamwork and leadership under pressure. But Sarah found herself focusing more on the psychological preparation that she wished someone had shared with her years earlier. "The most important thing to remember," Sarah emphasized, "is that you're not representing all women. You're representing yourself. Your success or failure doesn't determine whether other women can succeed in special operations. It just determines whether you succeed." Maria nodded thoughtfully. "That's a lot of pressure off my shoulders." "Exactly. Focus on being the best version of yourself, not on proving a point about gender equality." As their conversation wound down, Maria asked the question that Sarah had been expecting. "Do you ever regret it, choosing that path, even with everything that happened?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, considering her response carefully. It was a question she'd asked herself countless times, especially during her darkest periods of recovery and adjustment. "No," she said finally. "I don't regret it. What happened to me was terrible. Losing Jake, losing my mobility, having to rebuild my entire identity. But the alternative would have been living my entire life wondering, what if? I'd rather have tried and been injured than never have tried at all." Maria seemed to find comfort in that perspective. "Thank you," she said as they prepared to leave, "for being honest, for sharing your story, for showing me that it's possible. It's more than possible. If you want it badly enough and you're willing to work for it, it's inevitable." The conversation with Maria had reinforced something that Sarah had been gradually realizing over the past few weeks. Her story, both the triumphs and the tragedies, had value beyond her own experience. By being visible, by sharing her journey, she could help other women navigate similar paths. Over the following weeks, Sarah found herself becoming more engaged with the veteran community in Phoenix. She started attending more support group meetings, not just as someone seeking help, but as someone who could offer guidance and perspective to others. She began volunteering with organizations that helped veterans navigate the VA system and access the benefits they'd earned. The change in her own outlook was remarkable. For months after her injury, Sarah had felt like her military service was something that had happened to her, a chapter that was closed, an identity that was lost. Now she was beginning to understand that her service wasn't something she had done, it was something she was. The skills, values, and experiences she'd gained in the Rangers weren't gone. They were just being applied in different ways. Dr. Hawkins noticed the change immediately during their next therapy session. "You seem different," she observed. "More grounded, maybe. More connected to your purpose." Sarah considered the observation. "I think I've been looking at this all wrong. I've been thinking about my injury as the end of my service, the end of my ability to make a difference. But maybe it's just a transition to a different kind of service. What does that look like for you?" "Mentoring young veterans like Maria, helping people navigate the VA system and access the benefits they've earned. Maybe even advocacy work, policy stuff. There are a lot of problems in how we treat veterans, especially women veterans and veterans with disabilities." Dr. Hawkins smiled. "It sounds like you're finding your new mission." "I think maybe I am," Sarah agreed. The following Tuesday, Sarah returned to the VA office for a routine follow-up appointment. As she wheeled through the waiting room in her new chair, wearing another sleeveless shirt that displayed her tattoo proudly, she noticed that the atmosphere had shifted permanently. Staff members greeted her by name, other veterans nodded respectfully,
and the receptionist was consistently professional and helpful. But more importantly, Sarah noticed a young woman in the corner, probably in her early 20s, wearing civilian clothes, but with the posture and bearing that suggested military experience. The woman was staring at Sarah's tattoo with the same mixture of amazement and inspiration that Maria had shown weeks earlier. Sarah made a mental note to introduce herself after her appointment. There was always another conversation to be had, another story to share, another person who might benefit from knowing that their dreams are achievable. As she waited for her name to be called, Sarah reflected on how much had changed in just a few weeks. The decision to stop hiding, to be authentically herself, had opened doors she hadn't even known existed. More importantly, it had reconnected her with her sense of purpose and her understanding of what it meant to serve. She was still Sergeant Sarah Mitchell, 1st Battalion, 75th Rangers. She was still a sniper, a leader, a warrior. The venue had changed, the mission had evolved, but the core of who she was remained unchanged. Rangers lead the way, and Sarah Mitchell was still leading. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from